Kia ora koutou, ko hiu tako ingoa, he kaiwhaka ako, matua aho, ki Manaaki Whenua. Welcome everybody to next of our webinar series. This morning we're going to hear from Ines Schonberger, who's one of our starlight characters in the Herbarium here at Manaaki Whenua. And I can tell this seems to be like only described as a controversial topic, because did the authors of the Flora of New Zealand Volume 4 get it wrong? It's a very brave title for a talk. So Ines, take it away. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the kind introduction. Yes, I have a very controversial title. My title is, did the authors of the Flora of New Zealand Volume 4 get it wrong? And to put you all out of your misery, I will answer this question immediately with my next slide. No, of course not. They didn't get it wrong. To explain this a little bit, I would like to explain what a flora is. The definition of a flora is an authoritative summation of taxonomic knowledge for a given region at a given time. Most essential is the given time here. A flora can never be definitive because new facts and information are always coming to light. And this applies especially to the adventive flora of New Zealand. Now we have the next problem. What is an adventive flora? Adventive is derived from the Latin word advena, which means a stranger or immigrant. Thus, it can be applied to all non-indigenous wild plants in New Zealand, since all have an advent. But as with human migrants, so with plants, some become fully naturalized, some never established, some being collected only once and never seen again. Or sometimes they're just lacking the means of dispersal to take them to more favorable situation, and they remain very close to the first introduction site in the country. So when did the first adventive plants occur in New Zealand? So where does the story begin? It doesn't begin with Captain Cook coming here and with the Europeans. Now it began far earlier, actually pre-1768. The first plants were introduced by Polynesian settlers. And I have some 3 examples here, which are regarded as our first adventive for New Zealand. It's here, I expect here, Orientalis and Biden's Pilousa. These two of them are weedy daisies, and they're very easily introduced and brought in the country with probably weaving material, fishing equipment, or just on clothing. The third plant here in the picture is the candlenut, or Aloritis molucanus. The candlenut is a member of the Euphorbiaceae, or the spurge family. And the nut has been used as well as the oil, which was produced out of this nut, but all over the Pacific. And the nut can be eaten, despite the fact it's meant to be a little bit poisonous, but when it's roasted, it is a good food. And then we carry on, and the first Europeans coming to New Zealand, and you all know Captain Cook, and he brought along Banks and Solander, and these guys picked up some other adventive plants, which we don't know for sure that they were adventive back then. These were Ipomea batatas, or the kumara, and Brosinettia papifera, the paper mulberry. So these 2 plants have been collected by Joseph Banks and Daniel Solander of their first journey, and they're vouchered in a herbarium. So it's quite impressive that they have been very early introduction being vouchered in collections. Then we continue the story of adventive plants in New Zealand with collection made by Richard in 1832. And these are the normal radish plant and the broadleaf plantain, Raphanus sativus and Plantago major. And then the adventive species really took off. The hooker flora, the 2 hooker floras, contain a total of 135 adventive plants, and Kirk, regarded as one of the first resident botanists in New Zealand, lists 454 adventives in his student flora. And a flora dedicated just to New Zealand adventive plants was written by H.H. Allan in 1940, which contains 788 adventive species. That's quite impressive already for such early date. Now we have to mention Arthur Healy. He was dedicated to the New Zealand adventive plants, was naturalized flora, and he published his findings in the contribution to the knowledge of the New Zealand naturalized flora. And he also published his findings in the Flora of New Zealand, Volume 3. This flora deals with the monocot adventive plants of New Zealand. And here we are. Here are the three authors of the Flora of New Zealand, Volume 4, Bill Sykes, Colin Webb, and Phil Garnock-Jones. These guys did a lot of work on the adventive flora of New Zealand and published 326 new species in checklists which predate the actual flora. And here it comes, the book of the adventive flora of New Zealand, which was published in 1988, and it contains a total of 1,470 species. But of course, it never stops here. It's the number of adventives keep ever growing. And I have a very impressive slide, or at least I think it's very impressive, which shows you how fast the adventive flora is growing. By now, we're counting the number from the checklist, which was published in 2021. We have a total of 2,835 adventive plants in New Zealand. And this is actually brings up the number from the flora of 1,365 species. Means since the flora was published in 1988, the number of adventive taxa in New Zealand has doubled or almost doubled. How do these plants get into New Zealand? Where do they come from? And I have a few headings here. They can be either new discoveries, which we really don't know how they got here. And this is an example here of Piptochetum depressum, steepwood needlegrass, which was found in, I think it was 2011 in Camp Bay on the Banks Peninsula. Well, we don't know how it got here. Maybe it came through the port from Littleton, maybe it was brought in by sheep, but we don't know how it got here. Another more spectacular new adventive is the sea spurge. It's a nasty weed, it's an environmental weed. We really don't want it, and it pops up everywhere. It was first recorded in 2012, and now it spreads all over New Zealand sand dunes. Again, we have no idea how it got here. We don't think it is pretty ornamental. It was brought in deliberately. Was probably brought in by waterfowl or seabirds coming from Australia, where this plant also is a weedy species. And the same applies to this one, which is the greater willow herb Epilobium hirsutum, which was first recorded in New Zealand 2018 and was found quite close to Christchurch by Jason Butt, and it's like Pegasus, just a bit north of Christchurch. Again, it's not a very pretty plant, and it was discovered on a little lake close to the coast, where probably seabirds brought it in. But this is only speculation. We don't know exactly how these got in. Other changes in the flora can be rediscoveries. Plants which have been known in New Zealand previously, like this plant, which is known as velvet leaf or Abutilon theophrastii, and this was first discovered in New Zealand in 1968. Well, yes, it was discovered, but then it was eliminated. We got rid of it, thank goodness. But unfortunately, it came back to New Zealand. It was reintroduced in 2016 as a seed contaminant. And now we have it, unfortunately, all over New Zealand. And there's only little chance that we ever can get rid of it again. Very similar to the velvet leaf is the blackgrass. It was first recorded in New Zealand in 1941, and then never again until we got a seed contamination happening in 2016. and the plant is now all over localized in the South Island, but still coming up every year, so we still haven't got rid of it again. And then there are plants which have been a long time in New Zealand, but they have never been recorded because they haven't been recognized or identified. And this is an interesting example. This is sage, which have been collected in 1961 over in Hokitika, and it has been just determined as an undetermined adventive sage. As only recently that Carrie Ford here at Manaaki, Whenua, Landcare Research is undertaking a revision of New Zealand Carex species, that she came across it, the Herbarium specimen, and was able to identify it and put a name to it. And it is now identified as Carex branuphis, or the green-ribbed sage. But by far the most newcomers in the adventive flora are garden escapes. And I only have two pathetic little examples here, which is camellia. Camellia, everyone has camellia in their gardens, or almost everybody. And they're nice, beautiful garden plants, very pretty. But suddenly in New Zealand, they decided to set viable seeds. And that's a Herbarium sheet where you can see that there's seedlings of a camellia species. But even more ornamental and beautiful plants used for landscaping around the country, like Biosecurity Bonanza, the Mexican lily, has now decided to jump the garden and produce viable seeds, and seedlings have been collected in the wild. Other problems with New Zealand adventive plants are that they can change their range. So they keep ever growing and spreading. A good example is, again, an example from a local example here from Christchurch. That's the cow parsley. The cow parsley has been recorded in Christchurch in 1990, just in local gardens around where Bill Sykes lived. And now you can find it everywhere. It's a real cow parsley forest along the Avon and the Heathcote River here in New Zealand. So it just took off. It just exploded. These similar things could happen to the Himalayan balsam, a weed I'm quite familiar with because it has been a big problem in European countries. They took over all the waterways or along the waterways. We have a very early record from New Zealand, from the Paparao Ranges. It was collected in 1925. It's just lingering about, so it has never taken off that much in New Zealand yet. But we have quite significant populations now here in Christchurch, but also in Timaru. So things can change. Things suddenly can become wild. And then there's a problem with misapplications or misidentifications. Well, you might call it, these are the real mistakes that have been made. But you can't blame the authors for this, because when they made the Flora of New Zealand, there was only a limited material of Herbarium specimens available. They could compare New Zealand material, and there also was a limited knowledge around. These days, we have advantages of public websites, of larger Herbarium specimens, a better interaction with other herbaria to confirm our plants. An example is the tamarix. According to the Flora 4, the naturalized or adventive species of tamarix is Tamarix chinensis. But we have learned now that most of the wild tamarix in New Zealand are actually Tamarix ramosissima, a different species. Tamarix chinensis is known from China and Korea, while Tamarix ramosissima originated in Europe. Similar example is Columia grandiflora. Flora 4 says that the Columia in New Zealand is Columia cavanillesii, but it's not true. The Columia now, which we know is in New Zealand, the only Columia is the large flowered Columia grandiflora. And there are taxonomic changes we couldn't anticipate or see. There is lots of research done in taxonomy of plants. A nice example is the Livingstone daisy. It was known not just in New Zealand, but everywhere in the world as Dorosianthus bellidiformis. and now it changed its name. It's now Cleritum billidifume. The same applies to the yellow fumitory, which was known as Corydalus lutea, and it's now Pseudofumaria lutea. And the most remarkable, which I think is quite funny, it's the rosemary is no longer a rosemary, but a salvia. These are changes in taxonomy, in phylogenetics, and especially with molecular data coming in, which we have to adopt to our flora. So how do we actually make this information available? How do we record 1,356 new records for New Zealand, about 900 range extensions, and hundreds of taxonomic changes? The best thing to do, though, is a database. At least I think it is. We have two databases here at Manaaki Landcare Research which deal with these issues. One is the plant name database. It contains about 52,700 records of plant names. The second database is the Allan Herbarium specimen database. By now, about 300,000 records are listed in this database, which relate to herbarium specimens. These two databases are available for all of you. They are available for the public, and they can now be found on our brand new New Zealand Biota website, which is called Biota NZ. Have a go and have a look if you can find some of this information. It's quite easy and straightforward to get into. If you want to approach the herbarium specimens directly, I would recommend to go to our SCD systematic collection data. Again, the systematic collection data contains not just the plant collection, but also insect collection, the fungi collection, and so forth, other collections held here at Manaaki Whenua. But the systematic collection takes you directly to either of these collections, and you can search for herbarium specimens. But we have done the hard thing for you. If you don't want to trail through all of our databases, go and have a look at the checklists which are published in annually here at Manaaki Whenua. I recommend the checklist of seed plants, and this is the title page of the one from last year. The new one is coming out soon. They can be found in the data store of Manaaki Whenua Landcare Research. And if you can't wait, if you're really curious and want to see more up-to-date changes, you can also find this here. You can see the changes in the database on a quarterly basis. So whenever I change something in the Flora of New Zealand, you can have a little nosy in here and can see what has changed. This also enables you to download the information in a CSV file, so you can sort and find and make it fit for your purpose. But the crown of it all, or it's meant to be the crown of it all, is a new generation of floras. Here at Manaaki Whenua Landcare Research, the Allan Herbarium, we're working on an up-to-date flora, which is based on systematic research, which is dynamic and electronically based, which is available in a variety of forms, and which is authoritative. Our eFlora looks a bit like this when you go into it, and it's very simple and easy. You can find, you can approach it in various ways, like a profile. You can go out for weeds directly. You can approach the galleries that you can look at images. You can just do a simple search, or you can look for publications. This eFlora at the moment contains information of the existing flora, so also the slightly old and outdated flora I just introduced before, but also contains recently published work and new treatments. And see, my talk went too long. I'm already here on my last slide, because this work would not be able without a lot of help from you guys. I first want to thank all the staff of the Allan Herbarium and botanists from throughout the country. I really appreciate all the help for the likes of Colin Augel, Pat Enright, and only to name a few people who sent their collections to make us aware of new introductions to New Zealand flora. But I also would like and appreciate the work of biosecurity officers from throughout the country. The biosecurity officers are out there every day, and they usually pick up the really interesting material. And I always appreciate if I get new material for the herbarium, which I can then feed through our databases into the new Flora of New Zealand. Thank you very much.
Very cool, wonderful. Thank you very much, Ines. That was that's very, very interesting, quite fascinating, and really fascinating about some of those new weeds, the inventive weeds that you described. I remember planting a euphorbia in our garden many years ago that my wife liked the look of, and I then spent the next 4 years trying to get rid of the bloody thing out of the place. So I know how sort of invasive some of these can be, and interesting that things that we would have as garden plants and not really think much about are such significant weedy, invasive weedy issues for the country too. So thank you for that. At this time, no one's posted any questions. Oh no, look at that. Someone actually has. So this is from Fiona Thompson. Fiona says, thank you for an interesting talk. Ines, can you comment on how you feel Manaaki Whenua Landcare Research databases can help support the recommendation 6 of the PCE Space Invaders report for a national weed database?
I'm not familiar with this particular paragraph, and I believe that we definitely can supply some support as we list and especially the database of herbarium specimens, give and supply some distribution data of these weeds. So I think the more relevant for your purpose, Fiona, is our specimen database. You can access and see where the plants have been collected, the earliest record of these particular weeds, and how they spread throughout the country. So I think this would make the herbarium collection really valuable.
Cool. Thank you. Rebecca Stanley has also asked, has Manaaki Whenua Landcare Research ever worked with or engaged botanical gardens to seek specimens of newly naturalizing species?
Sure, we do. Again, I can speak from the collections aspect. So we love to accession specimens in botanical gardens, and I just want to mention Bill Sykes, who routinely collected seedlings in the Christchurch botanical gardens, who were very locally distributed. They came up wild in the gardens, and we accessioned them as potential new naturalization. Even they haven't jumped the garden fence yet, or they haven't left the botanical garden, we still have them in the collection that they were self-seeded and they came up under the mother plant. And so we do work with gardens very closely, and we also try to enhance our cultivated specimens in the collection. And you shouldn't underestimate the number of cultivated plants or exotic plants in New Zealand. We have a total number of 25,000 different plants in New Zealand. This is amazing how many plants, and most of them are luckily still inside gardens and inside houses. And they haven't jumped the fence yet, but some of them could be potential time bombs.
Yes, I think it's one of the things that I often use in the talks that I give, that New Zealand has, is one of the only countries in the world that has 10% of the world's flora established in it already. So yeah, we definitely like our flowering plants, and other plants tend to like us quite a bit as well. So another question here, Ines, from Shane Honer. Is there any way to predict the probability of plants already in New Zealand naturalizing and becoming invasive? That is, are there particular plant families that are more likely to become invasive than others?
Yes, I believe this is the case, and I can just refer to weed risk assessments. You can actually plants which, for example, set viable seeds and bird distributed, they are far more dangerous than plants which are not known to produce viable seeds, because you can actually get rid of them. You also have things like annuals, like the plant I showed before, the Himalayan balsam is an annual. So is the velvet leaf. They are not, they can be quite a problem, but I don't regard them too bad, because when you grab them out before they flower, they're gone. You got rid of them. Then there's a question of building a seed bank. So there are a possibility to predict the invasiveness, taking the climate in calculating the climate as well as how weeds spread, and just get to know the plants. So yes, and of course again looking at TBM data and how plants have been growing, where they have been growing, and the habitats and so forth.
Yep, and I think that's quite right, Ines, as well. I mean, I think us in the sort of biocontroller weeds area, we have we're well aware of plants within particular genera which we know are invasive elsewhere in the world and are therefore invasive in New Zealand as well. Tends to run in their sort of nature, doesn't it, really? Another question from Catherine O'Toole. Oh, sorry, she's really just making a comment to say wonderful to have all that data now so accessible, and that's dead right. And thank you very much, Ines. So it's true, I mean, there's so much the eFlora and then the accessibility through Manaaki Whenua's database system and website is fantastic access to so much information. So no one can say they don't know that something is weedy or is likely to be a weed in the future or what something is, because the information's all available there for sure. Ines, I think that's just about it. So thank you very much for a really fantastic talk and for getting through your 40-something slides within the time limit that we had available.
I can click fast.
You did right there. So thank you very much, Ines, and thank you to all of those that have attended this morning's webinar. And we'll click off. We have one more to go, the last one this afternoon. And that's the end of our series for this year from the Biosecurity Bonanza. So thank you very much. See you later.
Thank you. Bye.